On February 9, 2020, in San Salvador, the president of El Salvador, Nayib Bukele, walked into the country's legislative assembly at a moment when the whole nation felt tense and split. Soldiers were inside the building, and the world's cameras were watching. It was one of those political scenes that becomes instantly recognizable because it is not just about one vote or one day. It is about power, fear, and trust. And what makes it even more intense is that this was not a longtime traditional politician with decades in office. This was a president who had been inaugurated less than a year earlier, on June 1, 2019, after winning the election on February 3, 2019, at only 37 years old. When I think about that day in 2020, I think about how fast a life can change, and how quickly a country can place its hopes on one person, especially when people are exhausted by violence and disappointed by the usual parties. Stay with me today, because this story is full of real turning points, hard numbers, and choices that people still argue about. And if you like learning English through true stories about famous icons, subscribe, like, and leave a comment about what you think of Nayib Bukele, or whether you have ever seen a leader or a boss do something that shocked everybody and changed the mood overnight. Nayib Armando Bukele. Ortez was born on July 24, 1981, in San Salvador, the capital of El Salvador. Even that detail matters because San Salvador is not just a city on a map. It is a place that has carried the weight of Civil War history, economic struggle, and gang violence for decades. His father, Armando Bukele Katan, was a businessman and also known as an imam in the local Muslim community, and the Bukele family has Palestinian roots. When people talk about Nayib, they often talk about his modern image and his social media style, but underneath that, there is a real story about identity and belonging in a small country where family background can shape how the public sees you. In simple everyday English, you might say he grew up with a lot on his plate. That means he had many responsibilities and influences around him from an early age, and that can shape how a person learns to handle pressure later. Before he became known internationally, Bukele worked in business and advertising. He was involved in the world of marketing, which is important because it helps explain the way he communicates now, with strong visuals, short messages, and a focus on public attention. Sometimes people assume politics is only about laws and speeches, but in the modern world, it is also about narrative. And if you have ever tried to speak English confidently, you know this feeling. It is not only about grammar, it is about the story you are telling and how you make people feel while they listen. Bukele's early professional life helped him understand that. He learned how to craft an image, how to persuade, and how to move fast. His formal rise in politics became visible when he became mayor of Nuevo Cuscatlan, a municipality in La Libertad department. He took office in 2012, and at that time, he was still a young politician compared to the old guard. Nuevo Cuscatlan is much smaller than the capital, so it became a kind of testing ground. This is where you see a pattern in his story that comes back again and again. Start in a smaller space, build a reputation, and then move to a bigger stage. A simple expression we use in English is prove yourself. It means you show, through action, that you can really do the job. Being mayor in 2012 gave him a chance to prove himself to supporters and critics. Then came a bigger, more symbolic step. Bukele became mayor of San Salvador, the capital city, taking office in 2015. San Salvador is the center of politics and media in the country, so being mayor there is not just a local job, it is national visibility every single day. When you hear people say someone is in the spotlight, that is exactly what happened. In the spotlight means everyone is watching you, praising you, judging you, waiting for mistakes. During these years, his public profile grew quickly, but so did political conflict. Bukele was originally connected with the FMLN, the leftist party that had transformed from a former guerrilla movement into a major political force. Over time, the relationship broke down. By 2017, he was expelled from the FMLN. That expulsion became a huge moment in his storyline because it pushed him into a position where he could rebrand himself completely, not as a politician of the old political left or right, but as something new. Whether you admire him or criticize him, you cannot really understand his rise without understanding how he separated himself from the traditional party system. In the late 2010s, El Salvador had been led by the two big parties for years, and many Salvadorans felt stuck. Violence and gang control were still major fears in daily life. People were tired. And when people are tired, they often look for a leader who feels different. Bukele created his own political movement called Nuevas Ideas. The name itself, in Spanish, means new ideas, and you can hear what it is trying to communicate even if you do not speak Spanish. It is basically saying, we are not here to repeat the old arguments, but building a party is not simple, and the election calendar does not wait for anyone. In the end, for the 2019 presidential election, Bukele ran with Ghana, a different party. That detail matters because it shows how politics can be strategic and sometimes messy. In real life, people do not always take a straight road. Sometimes they take the road that is available. On February 3, 2019, Nayib Bukele won the presidency. That election was a turning point, not only because he won, but because it broke the long pattern of the two main parties dominating the presidency. Then, on June 1, 2019, he was inaugurated as president of El Salvador. He was 37 years old. When someone becomes president in their 30s, it changes the vibe. It sends a message about generational change. It also creates huge expectations, because people feel like youth equals energy and quick results. But politics is not a sprint. And I want you to remember that phrase, not a sprint. A sprint is a very short, fast race. When we say something is not a sprint, we mean it is a long, difficult journey that requires patience, strategy, and endurance. Very early in his presidency, Bukele focused heavily on security and the fight against gangs. This is where you have to understand El Salvador's reality. For years, gangs like MS-13 and Barrio 18 were associated with extortion, threats, and fear in many communities. Many families lived with daily stress, and many small business owners paid money just to survive. So when Bukele talked about security, it was not an abstract topic. It was personal for people. And when a leader promises safety, that promise can become emotionally powerful, because safety is not a luxury. It is the foundation for everything else, like school, work, and hope. Then we come back to that specific moment I mentioned at the beginning, February 9th, 2020. Bukele's government was pushing for funding related to security, and the confrontation with the Legislative Assembly became dramatic and widely reported internationally. It was one of those scenes where the image becomes the story, because it raises questions about democracy, checks and balances, and how far a president can go to get what he wants. A useful English expression here is push the limits. To push the limits means to go very far, sometimes too far, to test what is allowed. For supporters, it can feel like strength. For critics, it can feel like danger. And in a tense country, these interpretations can split families, friends, and entire communities. In 2021, Bukele's political power grew even more. In the legislative elections that year, his allies won major strength in the Legislative Assembly, and this mattered because in many political systems, the legislature can block or support the president's agenda. When the president has strong backing in the legislature, things can move faster. It can also reduce limits on the president, depending on how institutions respond. And this is where the story becomes complicated, because speed and control can feel like progress to some people and like risk to others. When people say a leader has momentum, this is what they mean. Momentum means the energy and success keep building, making it easier to win again and again. Around this time, Bukele also became famous globally for something that seemed almost unbelievable for a small Central American country. In June 2021, El Salvador's Legislative Assembly passed a law to make Bitcoin legal tender. The Bitcoin law took effect on September 7, 2021. These are clear dates that show how quickly the idea moved from announcement to reality. El Salvador became the first country in the world to adopt Bitcoin as legal tender. That is a measurable, historic fact, and it instantly placed Bukele in a global conversation about technology, finance, and national sovereignty. Some people called it visionary, others called it reckless. International financial institutions, including the IMF, expressed concerns. Protests happened in El Salvador too, and not everyone wanted this experiment. But whether you love it or hate it, it was a signature moment with a real date and global headlines. If you are learning English, there is a phrase that fits this Bitcoin moment perfectly. Make a bold move. A bold move is a brave, risky decision that gets attention. And the simplest way to rephrase it is this: he took a big risk. Now, you might notice something about natural English. We often repeat an idea in a simpler way right after, especially when emotions are high. That is exactly what I am doing for you, because it helps your brain connect meaning to real life. Then, in March 2022, El Salvador entered one of the most intense chapters of Bukele's presidency. After a spike in killings, the government requested, and the Legislative Assembly approved a state of exception on March 27, 2022. Under this state of exception, certain constitutional rights were suspended, and security forces carried out mass arrests. This is one of the most discussed and controversial aspects of his presidency because supporters say it brought relief and safety, and critics, including human rights organizations, have raised serious concerns about due process, detention conditions, and wrongful arrests. It is emotional because it touches the deepest fear in society, violence, and the deepest fear in a democracy, injustice by the state. And those fears can exist at the same time, in the same person. Someone can be grateful to feel safer walking home, and also worried about what happens when the government has more power. In 2023, the government opened a massive prison facility known as the Terrorism Confinement Center, often called CCOT, located in Tekaluka. Images and videos of this prison spread around the world and became a defining visual of Bukele's security policy. It is hard to talk about modern politics without talking about imagery, because images shape how people feel before they even analyze facts. If you are practicing English, here is a useful everyday phrase. It sent a message. To say something sent a message means it was designed to show strength or make people understand a warning without using many words. The simple version is, it was meant to show power. As the security situation shifted, Bukele's popularity appeared very strong in many polls, sometimes reported as extremely high compared to many other leaders in the region. It is important to be careful with exact percentages because different polls show different numbers, but what is widely recognized is that he maintained strong public support, especially tied to the perception of improved security. And in human terms, that makes sense. When someone feels their neighborhood is calmer, when extortion drops, when a family member can take a bus without the same fear, that relief becomes loyalty. This is where I want to slow down and reflect with you, teacher to learner, heart to heart. People do not always choose leaders because of perfect policy details. People choose leaders because of lived experience. If your daily life feels safer, you may forgive other things. And if your daily life feels threatened, you may demand change, even if it is risky. That is not just politics, that is psychology. At the same time, the world kept watching concerns about institutions. One major debate centered on re-election. El Salvador's constitution and its interpretations became part of a heated national conversation. In 2021, the country's top court chamber, after being replaced in a controversial move by the new legislature, issued a ruling that opened the door for immediate presidential re-election. Supporters saw it as allowing the people to choose. Critics saw it as weakening a traditional limit on power. This matters because it sets the stage for 2024. In English, we might say the rules of the game were changing. That means the political system itself was shifting, not just the players inside it. On February 4, 2024, Nayib Bukele won re-election in El Salvador's presidential election, and he was later inaugurated again on June 1, 2024. Those are firm anchors in time that help us understand the arc of this story. Whether someone celebrates that result or worries about it, it is a fact that his political brand remained strong enough to win again. And if you listen carefully to the timeline, you can hear how fast his rise was. Mayor in 2012, mayor of the capital in 2015, expelled from his party in 2017, president elected in 2019, global headlines in 2021, major security crackdown from 2022 onward, and re-elected in 2024. That is a lot of national transformation in a little more than a decade. If you are learning English, here's a phrase that fits. Things moved at lightning speed. Lightning speed means extremely fast. The simple version is, everything happened very quickly. But a biography is not only a list of milestones, it is also what those milestones do to a person and to a country. When Bukele became a symbol, he stopped being only Nayib, the individual. He became an idea people argue about. To some, he represents order after chaos. To others, he represents the danger of concentrating power. And something I want you to hear, especially as someone learning English and learning how to express complex opinions, is that you can describe both realities without being confused. You can say, he delivered a sense of safety for many people, and you can also say, there are serious debates about civil liberties and democratic checks. In real English conversations, especially with mature speakers, we often hold two truths in our hands and talk carefully. Another thing that makes Bukele an icon of the modern era is how he communicates. He is famous for using social media directly, with messages that travel far beyond El Salvador. That is part of why people in places like the United States, Mexico, and across Latin America know his name, even if they do not follow Salvadoran politics every day. In the digital age, attention is a kind of currency. And Bukele understands attention. A natural English phrase here is, he knew how to work the room, even online. To work the room means to manage the mood of an audience and gain support. The simple version is, he knew how to influence people. And now I want to bring this back to you personally, because this is an English learning podcast, and you are not only learning facts, you are learning how to feel comfortable with real living language. When you tell a story in English, you do not need fancy words. You need clear time anchors, clear places, and a few emotional words that are honest. So listen to how the timeline keeps grounding us. July 24, 1981, born in San Salvador. 2012, mayor of Nuevo Cuscatlan. 2015, mayor of San Salvador. 2017, expelled from the FMLN. February 3, 2019, election win. June 1, 2019, inauguration. February 9, 2020, confrontation at the Legislative Assembly. June 2021, Bitcoin law passed. September 7, 2021, Bitcoin law takes effect. March 27, 2022, state of exception begins. 2023, CECOT opens in Tekaluka. February 4, 2024, re-election victory. June 1, 2024, inauguration. When you speak English, these time markers act like rails on a train track. They keep your story smooth and easy to follow. So, what are the signature moments fans and critics both recognize in Bukele's story? One is definitely the 2019 election that broke the old two-party dominance. Another is the February 2020 Legislative Assembly incident that raised global attention about democratic boundaries. Another is the Bitcoin legal tender decision in 2021, which made El Salvador the first country to do it. Another is the state of exception in 2022 and the mass security operations that followed. Another is the Cote prison in 2023 as a symbol of his anti-gang strategy. And finally, the 2024 re-election that confirmed how powerful his political movement had become. Each of these moments has a place, a year, and a reason it mattered. That is how you make a biography feel real. Now let me give you a gentle, human layer beneath all of this. Imagine being a young leader in a country where people are begging for safety, where families have lived with grief, where businesses are suffocating under extortion, where emigration has been part of the national story for years. In that situation, people do not ask for perfection. They ask for relief. And when a leader seems to deliver relief, the leader becomes emotionally protected by the public. That can be intoxicating. It can also be dangerous, because the leader may start believing that any method is justified. A phrase we use in English is drunk on power. I am not accusing anyone in a dramatic way, I am just teaching you an expression. Drunk on power means someone may start acting like power has changed their judgment. The simple version is, power can go to someone's head. At the same time, imagine being a citizen who has lived through years of fear. You finally feel like your street is quieter. Your cousin can take a bus without shaking. Your small store can survive without paying a gang. If someone asks you to trade a little freedom for a lot of safety, that offer can feel tempting. And this is where society has to make hard choices, not just leaders. In English, we say it is a trade-off. A trade-off means you gain something, but you give up something else. The simple version is, you cannot have everything at once. Internationally, Bukele has become a reference point. Some leaders and commentators talk about the so-called Bukele model when they talk about public security strategies. But every country is different. El Salvador is small, and its geography, institutions, and history create a very specific context. When people try to copy a policy from one country to another, results can change dramatically. A simple expression is context matters. Context means the situation around something, the conditions that make it what it is. The simple version is, where you are changes what works. I also want to mention something about the way biographies can affect language learners. When you follow a real person's timeline, your brain starts to predict vocabulary. You start to expect words like election, inauguration, mayor, legislature, security, law, protests, prison, re-election. And that is how you build English naturally, by meeting the same useful words again and again, inside an emotional story. So let me repeat a few of the key words in a natural way, because repetition is powerful. Election in 2019 and election in 2024. Law in 2021 and state of exception in 2022. Security policy in 2020, 2022, and 2023. Global headlines in 2021 and again in 2024. When you hear these words in real context, they stop feeling like vocabulary list words. They start feeling like tools you can actually use. As we get closer to the end of this story, I want you to hold one question gently in your mind, not to force an answer, but to practice thinking in English. What does success look like in a country that has suffered for so long? Is it lower violence rates? Is it stronger institutions? Is it both? Is it stability today or stability for the next generation? People argue about Bukele because they argue about that question. And he has become an icon because he represents one of the boldest modern experiments in public security and political communication in the region, with real outcomes that people can feel and real concerns that people can document. If you take anything from this episode, I hope you take this. Your English can sound natural even when the topic is complex. You just need to keep your sentences clear, keep your timeline anchored, and speak with honest emotion. And when you are telling someone about Bukele, you can say something like this in simple, fluent English. He was born in San Salvador in 1981. He became mayor in 2012, then mayor of the capital in 2015. He won the presidency in 2019 and became known for dramatic political moments like February 2020. He made history in 2021 when El Salvador adopted Bitcoin as legal tender, and then in 2022 he launched a major security crackdown under a state of exception. He stayed extremely influential and won re-election in 2024. That is clean English. That is powerful English. And it is yours. And just one more warm thought before we finish. No matter what opinion you have about Nayib Bukele, his story shows how one person can ride a wave of public frustration, use modern communication, and reshape a country's direction very quickly. It also shows how important it is, in any democracy, for citizens to stay awake, emotionally and intellectually. In everyday English, we say, stay sharp. Stay sharp means keep paying attention and keep thinking clearly. The simple version is, do not stop being careful and aware. If you want, leave a comment telling me what part of Bukele's story surprised you most, and if you have ever seen a moment in your own life or your own country where everything seemed to change in just a few years.